Welcome to It's Your Move, a show that may change the way you view persons with disabilities. This show is a program of Westchester Independent Living Center. We are an information and referral center located right here in White Plains on 10 County Center Road. I'm Lisa Tarracone. Most people wouldn't consider the ability to live independently in their own home and in their community a civil right, but an option they can exercise freely, based upon choice. But to tens of thousands of New Yorkers with disabilities who rely on Medicaid, community-based living is never a guaranteed choice, option, or a right, but a threatened form of independence that is subject to cuts in services and politics. The right to live in the least restrictive environment in the community was first recognized in federal law in the 1999 Supreme Court Olmstead decision. Yet cuts in medical services, prescription medications, and wage parity for personal care attendants can force individuals with disabilities into institutional settings, undermining their ability to live independently with freedom of choice in their own homes. My guest is Geri Mariano, and she will discuss some of the challenges she is facing, what it's like to maintain her independence in her own home and on her own terms while dealing with cuts to her Medicaid services. Welcome, Geri.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Geri, you came to mind recently when I read an article in the Examiner, with the Westchester Examiner, I guess, which is the May 30th to June 5th edition. It's fairly recent. And the opening line, I think, sums up who you are. It says, Geri Mariano has never backed down from a challenge. And then the article goes on to talk about your current struggles with your Medicaid managed care plan. But let's begin with that first sentence, right? You've never backed down from a challenge. It seems that all of your involvements up to this point, your academic accomplishments, your public presentations, your advocacy writing, your school awareness program, and now your current letter writing campaign to the governor, which we're going to talk about in a few moments, speak to that. And I think your childhood experience really has prepared you, if you will, for encountering these challenges. Perhaps you give us a little bit of history. Tell us about your background.
Sure. I'll try to do a Reader's Digest condensed version.
Of course.
I was born in October 1967, so I'm coming up on 50 years, which is crazy. And the times, as I say in my school presentations, were different, but they were changing. And people with disability, the civil rights movement was going on, the women's rights movement was going on, campus protests against Vietnam. But people with disabilities were still a hidden part of society, a hidden segment of society. And I talk about, in my school presentations, FDR hiding his disability, the Kennedy family hiding Rosemary Kennedy away. And sadly, understandably, but sadly, personally, my biological parents left me at White Plains Hospital when I was born. And in my mid-20s, I decided to go hunting for records of my birth and my hospital records for clues. And it was disturbing and really painful to see a copy of a handwritten note on top of my hospital records that said, "No pictures to be taken of this baby."
And that was the hospital note?
It was a hospital stationery, but it could have been the instructions from the biological parents.
Right.
I don't know.
Sure.
I was moved to Blythedale Children's Hospital, which is a wonderful facility. It really was groundbreaking at the time, and still.
And that's in Westchester and Valhalla.
Valhalla,
right.
New York. And I really credit the nursing staff, the patient care, for giving me that solid foundation. I always quote, even though people don't know who I'm talking about, Erickson's Stages of Development, because that first 18 months of a baby's life is key to developing trust. And I think about all the orphanages around the world where babies are left in cribs all day and they don't have that bonding experience. So I credit them. I also credit the Department of Social Services because I became a ward of the state when my biological parents emancipated me. They legally emancipated me. And they decided at that time, which was unusual, 1968-69, December, January, that I should not grow up in Blythedale, even though it was a residential facility.
Which was fairly common at that time. More or less. Not so much now, but I think at that time,
oh, definitely,
most folks felt that was a good living environment for people.
Correct.
Right.
But they bucked the instructions from the hospital records. Since I was legally emancipated, maybe they thought they didn't have to follow that instruction. They put my picture in the then Reporter Dispatch, the precursor to today's Journal News.
Right.
and they asked for a family. You know, they mentioned my special needs and not sure what future needs would be, but that they wanted me to have a home. And Bill and Doris Mariano were one of several families that answered the ad, and ultimately they were chosen by the Department of Social Services to be my foster parents' family. And I went home with them in March of 1969, March 26th, but my oldest sister Joanne said I was the best birthday present because her birthday was the 27th, is the 27th.
And you were how old at the time when you went?
17, 18 months old.
Okay.
So I had never lived in a home before then. And Bill and Doris Mariano gave me their name, Mariano. My legal name still is Geraldine Pinciero. I was never legally adopted, although my parents, who I call my parents because they're the only parents I know, they did want to adopt me. And my father worked at the time closely with state senators and state assemblymen. He was the lead counsel to the majority whip at the time. I forgot to bring the plaque with me. And he drafted a law that special needs children in foster care, should they be adopted, their medical costs would be covered despite the income levels of the family adopting them, you know, save that whether, you know, obviously not if they were millionaires. But the law did not pass, even though my mother delighted in telling me she brought me up to the assembly floor, probably when I was about age 2, give or take.
The New York State Assembly floor?
Yes.
You made your appearance.
I made my debut on the assembly floor, and everybody thought I was adorable, but at the time they felt for whatever reason, they could not pass the law. So I feel sad that children in foster care would not be formally adopted by people who wanted to. And my parents, and I understand intellectually, logically, the decision they made, they wanted to protect me for coverage, and they needed to protect their family as well. But emotionally, it's hard that I could never be legally their daughter. And so
in order to clarify, in order to keep services,
to keep Medicaid,
you could not be legally adopted. You'd have to be in foster care.
Correct.
So she would
I was a ward of the state until I turned 18. And ironically, I used to joke when I was in college that Mario Cuomo was my legal guardian. He was my second father.
And we'll talk about his son in a few moments. And you went to Byram Hills High School.
I did.
So you're able to do that, okay.
Pretty impressive that when I first went home with my family, Bill and Doris and their 3 daughters of their own, Joanne, Beth, and Andrea, we lived in Bronxville, but we were in the Yonkers city line. So I would have been starting school in Yonkers, and my sister would have gone to Yonkers High School. She had gone to, I forget, a small private school. And my parents thought the best bet was for all of us to go to public school. And while my sisters and dad were at school and at work, she took me around Middle Westchester, Northern Westchester, to visit schools in the spring of 1972. I would turn 5 in October of 1972, eligible to start kindergarten. Several school districts said, no, we don't think we could handle her. This was a year before the 1973 Rehab Act made it mandatory that public schools would have to accept special needs children. And I give Byram Hills a lot of credit for saying yes before they were legally mandated to. Absolutely. So I started kindergarten in Mrs. Bowe's class in September 1972. And I went through all the way through senior year with a small school. We had 182 kids in our class, and we were one of the largest classes at the time. We had 3 elementary schools, so I knew a third of my classmates from kindergarten on.
And after that, and then you graduated. You went on to Smith College.
Yes, I went to Smith College in 1985. Graduated in 1989 with a BA in American Studies, with intentions to going to Washington. but that never worked out for various reasons. I could not be like most college graduates who could bum a couch, sleep on a couch with friends, or sleep on the floor, or because most people's apartments were not accessible, and which came first, the job or the apartment, or money to live or the job. So it was hard to job interview long distance, and there was still, I would say, covert discrimination. I went to employment agencies when I graduated from college, and I actually learned how to type in high school, and I'm still a great typist. And people were always surprised. And they're like, wow, you type really fast. Or when I would score well on the grammar test, like, how did you score so well? But yet, I was never sent out on any job interview.
You've never been on a job interview?
From different employment agencies, they never sent me out on
Graduate of Smith College.
Yes.
Articulate, intelligent young woman, never sent on a job interview.
Correct. So it was really hard. I stayed at home for many years.
And so the challenges up to that point of surviving, the early part of your life before foster care, but just the huge disappointment in seeing the note from White Plains Hospital, and in the struggles throughout your younger life. Although, it sounds like you adapted really well and acclimated. You sort of have a strong sense of self.
I really credit my parents for that, my family. I think social services gave me to the Marianos because there was another, quote, finalist who was a single woman, a nurse at Blythedale. And if I had to guess, they gave me to the Marianos, not so much that my sisters would take care of me, but that I would know that the world didn't revolve around me, being part of a family. I would certainly get extra attention paid to me.
Right.
But being part of a family,
important,
that I would not be, the world would not revolve around me. And my parents, my mom specifically, Doris, said, you were dealt a bad hand in life, but the world doesn't owe you anything. Don't expect a red carpet rolled out for you. Don't expect anything handed to you on a silver platter. And don't feel sorry for yourself, because there are a lot of other people that have a bad deck of hands dealt to them, and really no one's going to like somebody who's just whining all the time. And I also believe, honestly, Lisa, and I have no way of really knowing this, but the combination of nurture and nature really applies to me. I think that I was perhaps born with a spirit inside, that just a flame that maybe flickers at time and close to dying out, but that keeps coming back.
It's palpable, I've known you for a while now. I think I met you at a focus group we were doing at our center around microaggression, and it was that time you were talking about, we were going around the table introducing ourselves and talking about some personal experiences, and you mentioned going to Italy and just wanting to it was a funny line, I think you said, if you were waiting for somebody, if you repeat that line again, it was great.
Oh, well, it was a 3-city tour for a 3-part celebration in 2007. I finished my master's degree in May of 2007. I was turning 40, and I decided to tack on a honeymoon for one because I can't wait forever.
You can't wait forever, that's what it was. And you went to Italy. Great.
And a lot of people thought I was crazy. A lot of people were worried about me. My oldest sister tried to convince me to let her come, and I said no. Part of it was my Italian heritage. Part of it felt that I was given up by my Italian biological parents because of a shame, that I wasn't perfect. And I wanted to confront the Italians on my homeland, my ancestry land.
Absolutely.
I wanted to confront them and put myself there, out in public, in their face. And I wanted to be the one in charge. I wanted to force them to deal with me. And I knew if anybody had come with me, they would talk to them instead of me. I wanted to be the decision maker. And I knew if my sister or anybody else came, they would defer to them.
Sure. So, and you had that opportunity, I assume, when you went to Italy, to confront.
Yes.
Amazing.
Lots of stares, lots of surprises. The hotel in Rome was very disappointing. I went into a bit of debt going to Italy, but I thought that I needed to stay at more 4-star hotels because I would feel safer, and I hope that the staff would worry if I came back at night.
And they're more accessible also, right? Accessibility.
Right. And the hotel in Florence couldn't have been more nice, more welcoming, more
I could
accepting.
sleep in a park in Florence. It was such a beautiful city. I wouldn't even, I mean, I just loved being there, so, yeah.
But I felt very out of place in Rome and felt, I actually felt when I walked into their hotel a disdain, like, who is this person walking into our trendy, chic hotel?
Well, we sort of, I've had shows, we've done shows in the past where I've talked to, my boss is one, and we talked about just the public perception of folks with disabilities, and the attitudinal shift that goes on when you meet somebody. And
Correct.
It's so, so we're going to move on. I want to talk about your current situation right now, Geri, with your Medicaid cuts. The Medicaid redesign plan began in 2001. And it was an effort initiated by the Cuomo administration to move folks on Medicaid into managed care plans, hoping to consolidate services and provide a more streamlined experience for people with disabilities. And I think, from what I've heard, it's anything but. And because these are managed care companies, many of which are for profit, they make bottom line decisions on what hours you need, what types of equipment you need. Which, again, as I mentioned in my opening, undermines the ability of folks to live independently. And with the proper supports, and you do have a personal care attendant, but you are independent. If you had the proper support, you can maintain your independence and continue with that. So what's going on with you right now with your managed care plan?
I just really would like to say, up until 2010, I was completely independent. I was ambulatory. I was living independently. I had help for 2 days a week just to do, jobs that are around the house that I, heavy laundry, bed changing, shopping. With a surgery in 2010 on April Fool's Day, really don't let a loved one have surgery on April 1st.
Wow.
My right hip went awry and I never bounced back, and I stopped walking in 2014, and in 2015 I had 2 spinal surgeries, so I've become much more debilitated in the last several years, necessitating a wheelchair, although I have been upright again walking with prosthetics. But let me backtrack if I can and tell me to move on if I'm going too slow. In 2013, I received a notice that I would be switched to managed Medicaid. I called up my then...
And you received that notice from the Department of Health?
Yes. I called up my then newly elected state assemblyman, David Buchwald, and I said, I'm sorry, I know you just got into office, but help. My father was always involved in politics, and he always said, use your elected officials, not use them, but use them as a resource and for support. And they found that there had been an error, and I was switched in error. So I was switched back to straight Medicaid until 2016, when I received another letter that I would be switched to managed Medicaid. Again, called up Assemblyman Buchwald's office, and we did everything by the book, but I was switched as of August 1st to MVP. And the switches were devastating. My aides, and I have 3 aides now, 2 of them have been with me 2.5 years after several years of very bad aides who were emotionally and physically abusive, and I would not say anything to people, sort of the battered wife syndrome. I was embarrassed.
It's a very common thing we hear from our consumers and friends I know, people that I associate with, and just in our network alone, our Systems Advocacy Network, that the shortage of, because of the low wage, there's no wage parity. And an aide is not just an aide, it's an intimate partner.
Right, they become part of the family.
Part of the family. And a lot of...
you're vulnerable
Absolutely,
with them.
Absolutely.
So when I found Anna and Maddie, I was thrilled, and Department of Social Services, who then had, when I was on straight Medicaid, had jurisdiction, they gave a 50-cent increase, and the wage is still pretty, I'll be careful with my words, pretty bad.
What is the wage?
The wage originally $13 an hour for weekdays and $13.50 weekend, which seems ridiculous. It seems utterly ridiculous.
And for that amount of money, people are performing personal care, right?
And are responsible for your safety.
For your safety. And, and there's a high level of capability, just psychologically.
Right.
Aside from the duties of a personal care attendant.
Right. They're also, I don't want somebody sitting on the couch. I want somebody to be interactive. I have had depression, probably technically still do, and I need interaction.
Absolutely.
I am not an introvert. God had a funny sense of humor. He did not make me an introvert.
Which is good for all of us. As you hear, and you have a great voice.
So DSS increased the pay to $13.50 weekday and $14 a weekend. And then when the switch over to managed Medicaid, it got reversed back to the pre-increase. My primary care physician, Dr. Donald Cohen of Armonk, who had been my doctor for over 20 years and a great advocate for me, he does not accept managed Medicaid. I was shocked that he took Medicaid all those years, and grateful, because most people know while Medicaid can be a blessing, it's also a curse,
Well,
if I may say so.
Sure.
Because the reimbursement rate is not great, and not everybody wants to accept Medicaid.
Exactly.
So I was grateful he accepted me all those years. But
so now you have no primary care physician.
Correct.
And your personal care attendants
have taken a pay cut, and they're working 2 and 3 jobs now.
2 and 3 jobs in order to. And a lot of folks, and just folks that I know, as I mentioned earlier, their personal care attendants are staying on, because they do feel like part of the family.
They do.
And consumers we know are trying to make up for that by in-kind services or exchanges to keep aides on. It's unfortunate. So you're at threat now of possibly losing your personal care attendants.
I'm always afraid that they might have to, which would be understandable. They have families, they have bills to pay, rent to pay.
Well, I mean, the state approved the minimum wage for fast food workers, right, at $15 an hour, and here we have personal care attendants doing, intimate, performing intimate services for folks with disabilities, and they can go make more at McDonald's.
And the other thing they did too is they limited the hours. They used to be able to work 7 days a week. I understand that might be too much and go into overtime, but now no one's allowed to work more than 5 days a week, which makes it difficult. So now I have to have three aides. And it's definitely difficult to manage.
Absolutely.
That.
You have to find the right fit, the interviewing, the training. So you facing this unfair, these policies that are coming through managed care, and these unfair assessments made by these plans, you initiate a letter writing campaign. And you've got quite a few signatures to date.
I believe we have over 200. I'm not sure exactly, because not everybody, I receive, messages and emails from people that they've been sent from all over the country. Actually, I know that a couple have been sent
all
from
over the
Europe.
country. That's wonderful.
From Europe, even. My Smith College classmates have been very supportive. Once a Smithy, always a Smithy.
Yeah.
The Smith connection is amazing. My hometown connection from Armonk. I want to thank Margaret Cunzio for getting News 12 involved also.
Right.
But everything that Assemblyman Buckwell's office had me do by the book with the fair hearings has been for naught, and nobody can give me answers about what happened with the fair hearing.
So the fair hearing. So what you did was you appealed. You went to appeal, and the appeal was denied.
Yes, the appeal was denied. Well, the first time I went, nobody showed up. The fair hearing judge said that it was his mistake that they did not notify the people, and he talked me into an adjournment for 3 weeks, and we came back in 3 weeks, and still nobody had showed up. Even though they had been properly notified, they hadn't sent any materials. I gave my arguments again, and the hearing judge was, I believe, very fair, no pun intended, that he said he would render a decision, but he wanted to warn me that his decision could be overturned by the powers to be in Albany, but I would not know.
So what recourse do you have now? I mean, I've read so much about and the studies have been done by independent organizations about these MLT managed long-term care plans, about these assessments, and you have the right to appeal, but they make abrupt decisions without proper notification, and the follow-through with regard to challenging is not always as streamlined as you would think.
The decision, I could have appealed with an Article 78, which costs a lot of money, which I don't have the funds to pay for.
Exactly.
I talked to a legal aid attorney who felt the laws were too new and she was in over her head, and she was worried in Article 78 would create, if it wasn't in our favor, wasn't favorable, that it could set dangerous precedents.
So at this point in time, we got about a couple of minutes left. I want you to tell folks how they can get in touch with you.
Sure.
If they want to participate and sign a petition.
Yes.
If they want more information about if they're experiencing cuts to Medicaid, if anyone out there is going through the same thing.
My email address and my website is Geri, that's Geri, 1 R, 1 I, short and sweet like me, at justcallmegeri.com. There are no spaces or dashes or underlines, one long phrase. And I started letters for Geri to try to get Governor Cuomo's attention because nobody seems to be able to reach him. My state representatives have told me that there's a fortress around him, and I've tweeted, I've emailed, I've called, and nothing has been getting through. So I decided maybe if a lot of people wrote to him, since he wants to be known around the country, I would have people from around the country write to him.
That's a whole nother show or a few shows around the Olmstead plan that the governor's office that he released back in 2012, I believe, and just trying to mandate that all services in New York State are performed in the most integrated setting. So Geri, thank you for coming on. I also just want to quickly mention, give a quick plug in the 10 or 15 seconds we have left, that your show, your school program, Just Call Me Geri, you go to public schools and you talk about the disability experience, and you dance with kids and you have kids interact with you, to sort of like diffuse the whole stigma and the whole awkwardness around
anti-bullying, being accepted. If I had not been accepted by my classmates, I don't think I would be here today. And they can go to my website, Just Call Me Geri, and I'm excited to have my first gig at Mildred East Strang Middle School.
Well, we'll have you back. Thanks so much, Geri.
Thank you.
And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.